Given that we're halfway through the first season, what do you all think of Rings of Power so far? If I were to sum it up in one word, that word would be stunning. The cinematography is absolutely fantastic. If I were to sum it up in two words, however, that second word would either be stately or slow, depending on my mood. This show definitely moves at its own pace, and it refuses to be rushed. And I swing back and forwards as to whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm also going to take this opportunity to call out the music for the show. I've been listening to the soundtrack, and like the cinematography, the music is sweeping and majestic. G'day, welcome to the Nerdy Dad channel. I'm going to do something a little bit different with the detail of this review. I'm not going to talk about the first half of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power by episode. Instead, I'm going to talk about it in 4 arcs. There will be spoilers in this discussion, so here's a quick spoiler warning. And let's get into it with the first arc. Galadriel and Numenor. The first character we see on screen is Galadriel. If there is a lead character to the show so far, Galadriel would be it. But this show is an ensemble. And by the halfway point of this season, this arc is about Galadriel, Numenor, and the absent king of the Southlands. The show opens with a scene from Galadriel's childhood, where, after Bully sink her paper boat, her brother Finrod gives her a morality lesson about the nature of good and evil. Galadriel then narrates a brief history of the events on Middle-earth that lead up to when the story takes place. This includes the death of her brother. This leads into a scene of Galadriel leading a hunting party of elves who have been hunting Sauron for centuries. In a cave atop an icy mountain, they find evidence of Sauron, including the same sin rod that marked Finrod's body. And we get this kick-ass scene where Galadriel takes out a troll. Her party defies her orders and abandons the hunt, as Galadriel herself has defied the orders of the king and continued to hunt beyond her authority to do so. Back in Lindon, we meet Elvond, who I'll talk about in more detail when I talk about his arc, and the High King, King Galad. The High King honours Galadriel and her party, but he honours them by sending them back to Valinor. Galadriel boards the ship with the rest of her party, but in the end she knows the evil has not been defeated, and Galadriel is a determined, even stubborn character. She leaps from the boat at the last minute, leaving her alone in Belagar, attempting to swim back to Middle-earth. Galadriel is picked up by a bunch of castaways, who, once they see her ears, show that they are highly mistrustful of elves. After they are attacked by a sea serpent, she finds herself alone with one of the castaways, a man named Halbrand. Eventually they find themselves picked up by a Numenorian ship. This is a good point to mention the cinematography of the show. The entrance to Numenor is spectacular, and like everything on this show, they take their time with it. And in this case, it is definitely worth it. To say the Numenorians distrust elves is an understatement. To say that Galadriel's entitled, demanding, and abrasive personality doesn't win her any favours is likewise an understatement. She is put under the watch of Captain Elendil, but he comes from a region of Numenor where they still revere the elves, and with the captain she goes to the Hall of Law, where she finds the meaning of the symbol she's been hunting for so long. It is a map of the Southlands, and she finds that, based on his necklace, Halbrand is likely the king of the Southlands. During this time, Halbrand has wound up in prison for theft and assault. Upon returning to the capital from the Hall of Law, Galadriel continues to make demands of the Queen Regent Miriel, and likewise she ends up in prison. However, it's Halbrand who points out that it was not her demands that got her thrown in jail. It was her threatening to see the king. So she escapes the prison and pays a visit to the king, only to find out that he is infirm. Miriel shows Galadriel a palantir, and that palantir shows a vision of the destruction of Numenor. Miriel sends Galadriel on her way without an army until the white tree sheds its leaves, which was a symbol that Miriel could not ignore. So a call went out for volunteers, and among those volunteers is Captain Elendil's son, Isildur. How's everyone finding the Galadriel arc so far? Let me know in the comments. In between arcs, it's worth talking about my level of Tolkien knowledge come into this, and the answer is middle of the road. I watched the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, but I haven't given them a rewatch in years. I have read Tolkien's The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogy, but likewise I haven't reread them in quite a while. I haven't read the Silmarillion, and I haven't read the Unfinished Tales. Alright, enough about me. On to the next arc. Elvond and the Dwarves. I love the relationship between Elvond and Durin, but we'll get to that. We were introduced to Elvond as a friend to Galadriel when she returns to Lindor. The conversations between Elvond and Galadriel act as much of an expedition dump as the narration of history that Galadriel gives at the start of the first episode, but it also establishes their friendship. After Galadriel boards the ship to return to Valinor, the High King reveals that he does believe Galadriel that the evil does still exist, but he feared that rather than destroy it, her search would instead keep it alive. The High King then sends Elrond to work with the elven smith, Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor wants Elrond to help him build a forge. We know that this forge will forge the Rings of Power. With a tight schedule, Elrond suggests that they draw workers from outside their own people, and he asks the dwarves for assistance. Elrond expected to be welcomed with open arms, but the reception he got at Khazad-dûm was frosty to say the least. As with Numenor, the cinematography and the visual effects work here is spectacular. This is not how I imagine the Dwarven Kingdom would look like in its prime, but it is lush and beautiful and warm and lived in. I can't quite recall the lifespan of Tolkien dwarves off the top of my head, but they are mortal, with far, far shorter lives than the elves. Prince Durin is pissed because his friend disappears for 20 years. It's the blink of an eye to an elf, but in that time Durin has married, he's had children. Elrond is able to bring Durin around though, through his wife Disa. King Durin III, however, thinks the timing of Elrond's appearance is suspicious, given the dwarves' recent discovery of the extremely rare and dangerous to mine metal, mithril. Celebrimbor convinces Elrond that his friend is keeping secrets from him. I don't doubt that Elrond has come to Durin honestly, but at this point I'm not as certain about Celebrimbor. We are reminded of the keenness of elven senses as Elrond overhears Durin and Disa discussing the secret is in the old mine below the Mirrormere, which of course then is where he goes. After making Elrond swear an oath, hand to mountain, Durin reveals to him the secret of Mithril. Like the Mountain Kingdom itself, the relationship between Elrond, Durin and Disa are so genuinely warm that at the halfway point of this series, this might be my favourite of the storylines we've been presented with. So what are you all thinking about Elrond's arc so far? Just quickly before I move on to talking about the Southlands, could you all like this video, subscribe to the channel? Cheers. The Southlands. Even more so than the other arcs, the Southlands arc seems to be a real ensemble. In the first episode, I thought the story being set up in the Southlands was going to be focused on Arondir and possibly Bronwyn. However, by the halfway point of this series, I begin to think I might have been mistaken, and that the focus of the Southlands arc seems to be on Bronwyn's son, Theo. Arondir is an elf stationed at Osterith, a watchtower in the Southlands. As shown by the High King when he sent Galadriel to Valinor, the elves believe, or at least want to believe, that the evil has been defeated, and so they're pulling back, and they're abandoning their watchtowers. Arondir is shown to be very, very fond of the human healer, Bronwyn. And when he's at Bronwyn's, a man comes to her with a sick cow. A black ooze comes from its udders. The man tells him that the cow came from the east, maybe as far as Hordern. And of course, this is where Arondir and Bronwyn go. Meanwhile, Bronwyn's son Theo and his friend Rowan break into Walden's barn, and hidden beneath the floorboards, Theo finds a sword hilt that speaks to him in the Black Tongue. Hordern and its surrounds are destroyed. There are fissures in the ground, but there's no bodies. Arondir enters a tunnel to find the source of the destruction. He follows the tunnel until he finds, and then is captured by, orcs. Bronwyn returns to her village to warn them to flee. She's ignored until she dumps an orc's head on the bar. An orc that had been in a tunnel underneath a house that her and Theo had barely escaped with their lives from. The Southlanders then flee to the Elven watchtower. Arondir, along with other elves and humans, are enslaved to dig for the orcs. Arondir and a number of the other slaves fought back, but they were defeated. Arondir gets as far as any of them, but he is not killed. He is brought before the orcs' leader, Adar. Adar, whose name means father in Elvish, is not an orc, but an elf. Adar let Arondir go with a message for the refugees in the watchtower. When Theo and Rowan make a trip back to the village for supplies, they find that the village is not abandoned. Rowan made it back to the watchtower without Theo. It's revealed that the orcs are looking for the sword hilt that Theo had recovered from the barn earlier. Bronwyn goes back to get her son, and when it looks like they're not going to escape, Arondir rescues them. When they return to Osterith, Arondir delivers Adar's message to Bronwyn, that the humans may live if they forsake their claim to the lands and they swear fealty to him. Each of these arcs has so much more than I can talk about here, but let me know in the comments what your favourite parts of the Southlands arc are. And with that, I'm going to move on to the final arc, that of the Harfoots. The Harfoots. I love the introduction to the Harfoots. The human hunters unknowingly trek across their home, but as soon as the hunters pass, the Harfoots just pop out of everywhere, as did their camouflage camp. Even more so than the hobbits of later ages, the status quo with these small people is to make themselves smaller. They consider themselves beneath the notice of elves and humans, and they do not wish to be noticed by the big people. Nori and Galadriel are very different characters, but they do have something in common. They are determined, and they share a disregard for authority. Nori is adventurous. You could equally say she lacks the fear of her people, or she lacks the self-preservation instincts of her people. But none of that is of consequence until the appearance of the stranger. This is the storyline I have least engaged with. Not to say I don't enjoy it at all. The Harfoots, Nori in particular, are extremely charming. And the events of the Harfoot story is important to them. As a self-contained story, I don't hate it. But as far as the overarching plot of the series goes, I'm just not feeling it. When Elvond was missing from episode 3, I felt it. I missed him. When the Harfoots were missing from episode 4, I felt that the other plot lines actually started to move forward. Clearly the stranger is how they're going to tie it back into the overall story. And I'll be interested to see how he, and possibly Nori and the other Harfoots, fit into the coming events with the creation of Mordor and the forging of the rings. But how are you feeling about the Harfoot arc? Are you hoping it starts to feel connected to the wider story? Or are you simply enjoying the charm of these little people, disconnected from the concerns of the big people? Feel free to let me know in the comments. But with that, I'm finished my discussion of the first half of this season of Rings of Power. This is the Nerdy Dad, signing off.